Welcome to this report presentation. This is part of the AADF 2021, Defending and Promoting Democracy and Civic Space with the SDGs. And we're going to talk about the SDGs, Democracy and Civic Space, COVID-19, and CSO engagement in Southern Africa. This report was compiled by Mr. Mahendranath Boskupor and myself, Tabi Hope Okontabi. Now, let's talk about what this report is about. So we'll talk about the SDGs, we'll talk about COVID-19 within the region, we'll talk about democracy and civil space, CSOs, international engagement on SDGs, and finally, our recommendation in these different sectors. Now let's start by understanding the Southern African region. The Southern African region is made up of 16 member states. These states form most part of the southern part of Africa and some islands within the Indian Ocean. Now, Southern African states form an economic community known as the Southern African Development Community, the SADC. Let's talk about the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, this report covers 14 countries out of the 16 countries within the region, that is excluding Seychelles and Comoros, due to data that was not available or data that was available. Overall, climate action is the SDG with the highest average performance across the region. Data collected from 14 countries shows that 10 out of 14 countries performed best in climate action. The second top performing SDG across the 14 countries with available data is the 12th SDG, and that's responsible consumption and production. The most occurring SDG is still the 13th SDG, which is climate action, appearing on the top 5 list for all 14 countries. In terms of world ranking, Mauritius ranks top among other countries within the region at 95 out of 165 countries. The lowest ranking country within the region is Madagascar, with a ranking of 159 out of 165 and a country score of 49.0. Madagascar also has climate action as the top performing SDG. Now let's talk about COVID-19 in Southern Africa. At the beginning of 2020, there was a global disaster, as we all know, with the coming of the pandemic. So most of the countries have been faced with a fall in democracy, where the governments are using this new era as excuses for autocracy. Complete lockdown had been declared with closure of the major civic spaces. Schools had to shift to online teaching, and these to an extent marginalized students from poor backgrounds with no internet access. A drastic fall in revenue has resulted in price hikes, and those affecting people from poorer backgrounds who before the pandemic also had difficulties in affording their basic needs. In many countries, migrants have been accused for the spread of the virus. Some countries cancelled issuing of visa and suspended flights, while many have witnessed maltreatment in COVID treatment and quarantine centers. Also talking about COVID-19, here is a time lapse of what happened during the outbreak of the pandemic. You see, at first it was Mauritius with so many cases because Mauritius is a tourist destination, and then you see cases rising with South Africa taking the lead in the number of cumulative confirmed COVID-19 cases. That's around May 2020. And as we move further, you realize that Mauritius falls down a bit and some other countries still take the lead in increase in COVID-19 cases, with South Africa at the top. And at this point, Seychelles didn't have any cases because Seychelles was one of the first countries within the region that had implemented COVID-19 vaccination. Now you see the cases in Seychelles increasing drastically. That's based on the percentage of the population, because after vaccination of almost everybody within the country, there was a relief of people and the government stringency as well, and so you saw that the cases increased. But the good news to that is that even though the cases increased, there was no significant increase in the number of deaths within the region. And you see, Mauritius, to an extent, maintained a steady flow of new cases, and also it's how it controlled the virus, and also the stringent measures with respect to lockdowns and all that. Now, if we move further, we would see the cumulative confirmed COVID-19 deaths, and South Africa is top on the list, and least on that list is Mauritius, actually, with the least number of deaths. And this data is calculated against the population, so it's a percentage. It's based on the whole population of the country. An interesting thing for us to understand here is that it is also easier for smaller countries like Mauritius and Seychelles to enforce stringent measures during the COVID-19 pandemic, and for countries as large as South Africa, sometimes it's difficult for the government to enforce some of those measures. Now, if we move further, we'll see that the share of people who have received at least one dose of the vaccine, Seychelles, is top, because Seychelles actually started the vaccination process very early, and we have Mauritius coming second, and the Democratic Republic of Congo is somewhere very down or very low on the list. And COVID-19 in Southern Africa, we can also see this graph that shows us the level of stringent measures. And if we take a close look, you could see what I was talking about initially, that Seychelles implemented very stringent measures at the beginning, and after vaccination reduced those measures, and then we saw a spike in the cases, and then they had to increase those measures again to checkmate the rise in cases. And you would see that there's some countries like Tanzania. Tanzania was not stringent at all, has not been so stringent during this whole pandemic period, because the government took out all the lockdown and restrictions and said, yes, the death rates are going to be there, but they believe that it was going to be so low that it would be insignificant. Now, if we move further, let's talk about democracy and civic space within the Southern African region. Now, within the Southern African region, you realize that we have countries at different spectrums of the democracy index, if we should say that. So while we have the Democratic Republic of Congo at the level of an authoritarian regime, we have a country like Mauritius, which has a high rating and is among the level of a full democracy. After Mauritius, you have countries like South Africa, Botswana, you could say Lesotho, Namibia, who are within the range of a flawed democracy. They're not so bad, but they're doing okay. And then we have hybrid regimes. We're talking about Comoros, Angola, Tanzania, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and the rest of them. Within hybrid regimes where they're not democratic as per se, but they're not fully authoritarian. If we move forward, let's talk about press freedom. So press freedom in some sub-Saharan African countries has fallen to a significant low level in recent years. So based on a report by Reporters Without Borders, about 21 countries fall under the average margin, making them very difficult zone for journalists. In world rankings, some countries in the region, such as Tanzania, have gone down about 6 positions. And according to Reporters Without Borders, in the past 10 years, about 102 journalists have been killed in Africa, and generally the killers go unpunished. So while countries like Namibia stand as one of those with the highest press freedom within the area, there is still so much work to be done within the region, within these countries, and also in the wider continent at large. Now, CSO's international engagement within the region, the importance of civil society organizations cannot be overemphasized, and the stability of CSOs form the basis upon which they can continue their activities and advocate for the downtrodden in societies. So while stakeholders such as the United Nations and governments deliberate on policies, CSOs are responsible for awareness and advocacy. Thus, they relate directly with members of the grassroots. Now, in the Southern African region, there are certain umbrella bodies or forums for CSOs. One of such is the Southern African Development Community Council of Non-Governmental Organizations. So the SADC CNGO is a regional umbrella body of NGOs operating in all SADC countries with the aim of facilitating effective and meaningful engagement between civil society and SADC institutions at both national and regional levels. Another of such engagement would be the SADC CSM, which is the SADC Civil Society Forum. So it's the forum that it was started first in 2005 on the different themes relevant to the emerging issues and related challenges experienced and or under consideration by the SADC region during the year. Now, some of the tasks of this particular body is to analyze, reflect, and dialogue on critical issues facing the region, impact on the summit of heads of states and governments, plan and develop independent actions and priorities for regional civil societies for the coming year, including identifying key campaigns, movement building, and areas of collaboration. Furthermore, another one of such organizations is the United Nations Office on Drug and Crime, collaborating with the region. So the UNODC convened 26 civil society organizations from across Southern Africa for the regional conference. Now, there are 4 priority thematics areas that stem from the recommendations of the implementation review mechanism. So we're talking about interagency cooperation, whistleblowing, asset disclosure. Then we're talking about accountability, identifying and managing conflict of interest in the context of public procurement. And finally, we talk about the Africa Regional Forum on Sustainable Development. So the forum was started in 2015 and is aimed at advancing the collective implementation of the 2030 Agenda as well as Agenda 2063. The forum offers a platform for stakeholders to review progress, strengthen learning, advocate effective policies, enhance multi-stakeholder collaborations in achieving the 2 agendas stated earlier. Now, our recommendation and conclusion for this report would be, first of all, for the SDGs. In order to fight poverty within the region, countries have to deliberately fight corruption and enforce accountability and stewardship of public funds. Alternative ways have to be adopted to ensure all children have access to education if we really want to be deliberate about meeting the SDG, the Sustainable Development Goals. There should be laws to protect women and offer them a place in decision making, both as state and non-state actors, because we should not leave any marginalized part of society or citizenry behind. Member states should adopt new initiatives that encourage recycling and waste reduction. That is, if we are to care for the environment. Now, recommendations concerning COVID-19 would be authorities should take into consideration the opinion of the population, because people have concerns. They're concerned about their lives and also the lives of their families. And there should be more transparency pertaining to funds and donations received from other countries to help during the pandemic. There should be accountability and stewardship of funds, whether in the part of state actors or even NGOs as non-state actors. The authorities should ensure that adequate measures are taken to protect children and elderly citizens. Protocols should also be observed by all, and policies regarding the need for vaccination should be made clear and supported by stakeholders. So all stakeholders should come on board to make sure that protocols are enforced and awareness and sensitization is carried out to enable people understand the need why everyone in the community should be vaccinated accordingly. Now, concerning democracy and civic space, it is imperative that the legislative arms of government within the Southern African region collaborate and deliberate on and enact laws that would ensure the sustenance and protection of human rights. Unobstructed flow of news and information should be encouraged and supported in order to drive the propagation of transparency and sustenance of accountability within the region. Online monitoring tools should be adopted by citizens and journalists to report occurrences of abuse and call the authorities to order where necessary. Because sometimes when perpetrators attack journalists and people within society, the they get away with it because there are no evidences. So it's important for people to leverage their mobile phones and other forms of technology to make sure that they gather as much evidence as possible should such an occurrence take place. And our recommendations concerning CSOs would be collaboration and partnership, both regionally and internationally, is necessary to drive a unified regional and global agenda that benefits the marginalized and downtrodden in society. Now, the state should allow and provide funding and help the CSOs trying to provide specific help to citizens during this crisis, because so many people have experienced an economic crisis. Such assistance will enable less privileged citizens pull through the economic challenges they face as a result of the pandemic. State and non-state actors should come together and work towards making sure that the rights of citizens, as well as freedom of speech as regards journalists within the region, is not abused or truncated. And so far, that's all that we have for this presentation. We hope that the information was educative enough. Once again, this report was compiled by Mr. Mahendranath Bosgopal and myself, Tabi Hope Okantabi. Thank you very much.